6 long years since Bethesda released this. A brief teaser for Elder Scrolls 6. Naturally, it stirred up quite a bit of hype. What does it all mean? Are those ships? And more importantly, where are we?
Send me a message, like location, I'm gonna come. Whatever you want, doesn't matter.
The location of the next Elder Scrolls was, and still is, the most talked about topic. And for a reason. Traditionally, each installment in the series is set in a single province of Tamriel, giving it a clear, distinct tone. My own Tamrielic journey started over 20 years ago with Morrowind.
This scent is new.
Set on a remote volcanic island filled with enormous mushrooms, land was equally alien and hostile. Oblivion took a sharp turn and presented a world reminiscent of Western European high fantasy, with its green rolling hills and endless forest. And finally, in 2011, Skyrim took us far north into the Nordic land of ice and lots of mead. Going back to the teaser, based on its overall tone, there's a consensus that Elder Scrolls 6 will take place in either Hammerfell or High Rock, with some even wanting to see both provinces in a single game, which I believe is a bad idea. I'm here to tell you that Elder Scrolls 6 is set in Hammerfell. It's a more or less public secret by now, and again, hardly a surprise. So we're going to do something a little bit different today. I'd like to share some of my general thoughts on the upcoming Elder Scrolls, but instead of going into specific lore details and politics, I will offer a broad speculation. Most of all, what will Elder Scrolls 6 be like? The geography, wildlife, type of quests, things I would like to see. Given how much time I spent with the franchise, witnessing all the changes throughout the years, I would just like to share some of my speculations in the most casual, light-hearted way. I will avoid commenting on ESO and its version of Hammerfell because I have not played it and I don't think that it's relevant to single-player games. It could be just my bias and I'm aware of that, but I tend to separate MMO from the main series as much as possible. So, let's begin. To be clear, my knowledge of Hammerfell and the Redguard culture isn't that extensive. This is mostly because, till recently, I imagined Hammerfell as a huge desert, until I took another closer look at the map, realizing that Hammerfell could easily be the most biodiverse province on Tamriel. For example, because it borders Skyrim, specifically Falkreath and the Reach, those lush pine forests naturally must extend into Hammerfell. So I'd expect Eastern Hammerfell to be mostly mountainous and rugged, with snow-covered high-altitude areas, juniper steppes, and plenty of woodland. Coming from the cold and green neighboring region of Skyrim, Hammerfell isn't just magically transformed into a barren, hot desert right at the border. There needs to be an organic, gradual transformation of the landscape, providing a highly immersive experience of a vast province. There is obviously an epic dry desert, but also lots of room for green patches of land, isolate forests, grasslands, and snow-covered mountain regions dotted with remote villages. Parts of northern Africa, like the Atlas Mountains, are renowned for their stunning cedar forests, which I believe would look great in the game. Hammerfell always reminded me a little bit of northern Africa anyways, as well as some Western Asian regions. For example, Persian oak forests found on the slopes of Zagros mountains. They would also look great and not only balance out the vast sea of sand found in central and western Hammerfell, but also add a touch of that hermetic woodland mystique. It'll be a home to a number of wild animals, including mountain goats, lots and lots of goats, red foxes, wolves and bears. I mean, you can't have an Elder Scrolls game without them. And even lions or leopards. Villages in this area will be scattered, almost forgotten, home to the Nord diaspora, renegade orcs, escaped outlaws, hermits and hunters of all kinds. Most remote ones, like Snowline, would be found high in the mountains, in perpetually snow-covered areas. Overgrown ruins, including abandoned Imperial Legion posts, would lie deep within forests, inhabited by depraved students of black arts, goblin tribes, and others. Barely visible ancient pathways would lead into dark caves. The reason for giving this area of Hammerfell so much attention is because it would provide a much needed contrast to the deserts and jungles found in the rest of Hammerfell, and as such, it shouldn't be ignored, which doesn't mean that the great desert of Alik'r won't have its charm.
Do you get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
Steel. Plenty of people here.
For some reason, the deserts of Hammerfell remind me of a story by Clark Ashton Smith, The Empire of the Necromancers, invoking images of ancient ruins and tombs buried under the hot sands, only to be raided by a pair of powerful necromancers on a quest of raising an undead army of soldiers and servants. And what will make this storyline especially interesting in this case is that Redguards really despise necromancy. Yet, the case of Loa al-Skaven proved that Redguards can become extremely powerful necromancers. So a questline featuring decadent necromancers in the middle of Alik'r Desert would undoubtedly feel very climatic, given how strictly taboo necromancy is in Hammerfell. And with a touch of ancient Yokudan mysteries and ruins, you get yourself a true pulpy, bizarre storyline. And the Kirkbradian aesthetics of tribal, vivid imagery and esoteric symbolism would also blend incredibly well with a subtly mystical note of a dry desert. Giant scorpions would hunt from beneath the waves of burning sand, while fierce, mysterious harpies stalk their prey from the above. On the other hand, Hammerfell has a sizable portion of humid, tropical or subtropical regions. I'd say that they would mostly cover western and southern parts, beyond the desert, including coasts and numerous small islands. These would focus on the themes of piracy, sea exploration, and similar tropes that most people associate with Hammerfell. And speaking of islands, maybe it's time to have something like Socotra. Although the mushroom-shaped dragonblood trees have led many to compare this unusual and alien-looking island to Morrowind, I believe that they will look and feel much more at home in this area of Tamriel. As for the trees, just to make things a little bit more unusual, I'd include plants like this beautiful tree fern, dating all the way back from the times of Pangaea. Prehistoric themes generally complement Tamriel, so I often draw inspiration from our own distant past. These coastal, tropical regions would have completely different culture. Unlike the quiet, meditative mountains of Eastern Hammerfell or even the central deserts, tropical Hammerfell is loud and loose. Here, there's danger in the crowd, in seedy taverns and hazy docks, as assassins and thieves prowl the shadowy streets. In many of my videos, I focus on characters themselves, as unique, interesting NPCs bring these games to life. In essence, Meta-NPCs would be other adventurers in the game. Characters with special, more sophisticated AI packages that could move around the province on their own, trade, level up, and loot dungeons. Sometimes they would even join factions and compete with the player, and they could also die. Skyrim has some very basic examples of such traveling NPCs, like Tulsgar the Wanderer, and with some AI-based mods, I often found certain characters, companion members, or mercenaries like Utgerd the Unbroken, traveling around Skyrim and fighting random hostile creatures. Or, hunters would go out and actually do some hunting. If Skyrim could script such characters back in 2011, I'm sure that next game, more than a decade later, could do much more. These random encounters do make a big difference, as you want to see fellow adventurers and traders on the road, friendly or not, making each playthrough more unpredictable. So I'd love to see scripted bandit raids more often, and adventurers of all sorts encountered throughout the game. I'd also love more unique named bandits. Skyrim has a few, and they do make a difference. In general, I would prefer if every NPC, aside from guards, had a name. With its rich lore, complex political situation, and varied biodiversity, Hammerfell offers a great chance to revive the element of weird fantasy in Elder Scrolls, the one that was seen back in the old days, like Morrowind. When it comes to Hammerfell, many people expect a setting that is primarily focused on pirates, swashbuckling, but I think that could be only a part of it. Hammerfell is large enough to include a variety of themes and biomes, as we already discussed. Its proximity to High Rock and even Colovia, and popularity of divine temples, including the worship of Standar, could help portray the medieval, knightly aesthetics of Redguard culture. Anachronistic depictions are by now almost a trademark of the series, justified by the fact that Elder Scrolls isn't Earth, so same rules don't apply. Just in Skyrim we had prehistoric cave-dwelling reachmen, a Roman Empire-based empire, while the rest of the game displays predominantly post-Viking medieval influences, with cities like Solitude reaching all the way to the late medieval period, or early Renaissance, at least in terms of architecture and fashion. On top of that, Skyrim and therefore Tamriel are ripe with prehistoric, Pleistocene-inspired fauna. Mammoths, saber cats, and cave bears are well known in Skyrim. In that regard, Ayla the Huntress has a rather interesting line about a mysterious mammoth-sized bear that lives in Hammerfell. Her line reminds me of those giant prehistoric ground sloths, but I could be wrong, obviously. Maybe it's just a giant bear. Still, I'd go with the Aerometarium, especially because it lived in steppes and deserts. And if you showed it to someone from Middle Ages, a mammoth or elephant-sized bear is the exact description you'd expect from them. So I don't know, maybe it was a little subtle hint of the things to come. Just as Hadver says, what's next, giant snakes? I mean, why not? There were 40-foot or over 12-meter long snakes before and during the Pleistocene. And Hammerfell does have snake cults. Maybe we'll meet Tulsa Doom and his nefarious cult of Set. Oh wait, that's the wrong universe.
I will listen, Outlander, but make it quick.
My ideal Elder Scrolls 6 would be heavily influenced by the classics, especially Daggerfall and Morrowind. Morrowind because it was partially inspired by Dune, something that will work really well in Hammerfell, especially with the popularity of a current Dune franchise. I think that they might inspire developers again to maybe experiment with subtle, esoteric sci-fi ideas that were present in Morrowind. I want to feel again like exploring an alien planet while roaming the Alik'r Desert. Perhaps discover a long-lost, defunct Dwemer spaceship during an archaeological excavation, or a runaway Minotaur who used Dwemer tech to forge a Minotaur bronze armor.
Minotaur.
Obviously, in building up the so-called sci-fi elements within the Elder Scrolls, ancient Dwemer civilization will play the most important role. They are sufficiently old, enigmatic, and were genuinely developed in ways that no other Tamriel culture has ever been. In particular, Hammerfell, also known as Völunnfell, was home to Rurken, a Dwemer clan that left Morrowind after the formation of the First Council, and their new home was somewhere in the vast expanse of Alik'r Desert. What's interesting about them is that they crafted two famous artifacts, Volendrung, the mighty hammer, and a heavy shield, Spellbreaker. Both are now considered Daedric artifacts, belonging to Malacath and Periite. Periite could, by the way, play a large role as well. He's been somewhat neglected so far, and his dominion over plagues and diseases could reflect recent pandemic years. So maybe it's time for this obscure Daedric lord to take the spotlight.
I'd have been dead from this plague a year ago if not for Periite's protection.
Daggerfall, on the other hand, was known for its intricate set of immersive role-playing mechanics. If properly balanced, features like timed quests could make a return. Not all quests should be timed, of course, but in some degree they would make the world more reactive. Paired with the previously mentioned Meta-NPCs, these additions would really make the world more alive. And that is, in my opinion, something that earlier games lacked. I like to think of Elder Scrolls games as open-world theme parks, where the player is kind of waiting to step in. Rogweir won't be executed until we visit Solitude, and so on. And while there is nothing wrong with it, I believe that the experience of being in a living, breathing world that exists independently of the player and doesn't exclusively revolve around them would be more than welcome. The game could also reintroduce some of the obscure but classic creatures, like centaurs. They were actually planned for Skyrim but cut from the game due to their complex mechanics. Too bad for them. For some reason, developers really struggled with horses, to the point that they too were almost cut from the game. And centaurs proved to be even more difficult to program. But in my opinion, they should be brought back. Centaurs are among the reimagined classic creatures that are well known outside the Elder Scrolls universe, alongside giants, vampires, werewolves, minotaurs. Speaking of, I really wouldn't mind seeing minotaurs as well. Perhaps make them a rare encounter or even a unique dungeon boss. Centaurs could make excellent high-level enemies in forests, grasslands, and along riverbanks. They were imagined as nomadic hunters in Skyrim, meant to oppose mighty giants, and could play a similar role in Hammerfell. It's also quite nostalgic to think that all these legendary creatures will make a comeback in Elder Scrolls 6. They could lend Hammerfell the coziness and warmth of vintage fantasy RPGs. And I'd also expect plenty of goblin clans as well, especially alongside the Dragontail Mountains in the northern Hammerfell. Irgola, a Redguard trader in Morrowind, has a dialogue about spending entire youth goblin hunting in these mountains, which I have to say sounds very fun, and there should be a guild of goblin hunters. Now, another interesting topic I want to mention is the Wayward Realms, an upcoming game labeled as a spiritual successor to Daggerfall, and directed by Ted Peterson and Julian Lefay, ex-Bethesda developers who played a significant role in establishing the Elder Scrolls universe. Now, although I believe that Wayward Realms will be a different kind of a game, it still might have some effect on the development of Elder Scrolls. Wayward Realms promises a truly immense open world that will revive the classic RPG genre, especially by staying true to the design philosophy of classic role-playing games. In other words, it's Daggerfall with a modern gameplay, a 500,000 square kilometer open fantasy world that is constantly changing and shifting according to players' action. A game also without a traditional main quest. The Wayward Realms, if it succeeds, will undoubtedly usher in a new era of single-player role-playing games. And it already attracted quite a bit of attention and support from players who are obviously in demand of such experience. And I expect that its success will have some influence. If anything, at least it will inform Bethesda that there is still a market for intricate, immersive role-playing games.
Our hero claims a warrior's heart. I tell you, the dragonborn comes.
With that said, I'd prefer if Bethesda kept a scale similar to previous games, including towns. The addition of Ellicor Desert could provide some free barren space in order to recreate the desolate Sea of Sand, but overall, the province should reflect the size of previous installments. And this comes from someone who loves free roaming and vast open space. Now, I will offer a few, I suppose, controversial perspectives. The first one relates to settlements and why I'd prefer them to remain relatively smaller in scale. Skyrim, for example, is often criticized for having rather small towns, and while it's true and towns are indeed scaled down, it never really bothered me. Medieval Norse towns were relatively small, even compared to the rest of Europe. For instance, at its height, Birka, the second largest Norse town during the Viking Age, and one of the most significant trading hubs, had a population of just about 1,000 people, likely even less than that. So the problem isn't the small size of villages like Iverstead or Riverwood, but their number. Realistically, a province like Skyrim, based mostly on Northern European medieval society, would have hundreds if not thousands of Iversteads and Roriksteads. Hammerfell is obviously not Skyrim and is influenced by other real-world cultures, but the same principle should apply. Keep cities relatively small-scale, compact, and highly interactive. One of the main marks of the franchise is the ability to enter every building and peek behind every door. Also, having all or at least most of the NPCs named and unique. Take for example Whiterun. Each citizen has a name and some kind of a background, regardless of how insignificant they are. I could easily write a short paragraph about each one, defining their character and role within the game world. In Bethesda's latest game, Starfield, cities were somewhat expanded, adding a significant number of generic, nameless NPCs, aimlessly wandering the streets with no home or purpose other than to populate the game. And cities like New Atlantis do look larger in scale, but most of the buildings are mere models. Now, to be frank, I actually enjoy Starfield, although in a completely different way, and generic NPCs and non-interactive buildings don't bother me as much as they would in the Elder Scrolls game. And speaking of Starfield and controversial takes, here's the second one: quest writing. Starfield has arguably some of the best side quests out of all newer Bethesda games. I won't get into specifics right now, but I think that Starfield's quest lines, and Vanguard being the best example, are superior to anything in Skyrim. As a matter of fact, Skyrim's faction quest lines were never its primary selling point. I would even argue that they are perhaps Skyrim's weakest feature. So to summarize, Starfield's writing kind of makes me optimistic that Elder Scrolls 6 could at least perhaps have better written factions and their quests with more choices and interactions with supporting characters. I know, a hot take. Finally, there's a belief among some fans that all Elder Scrolls games, at least since Daggerfall, possibly even before, have an underlying secret plot involving the termination of the so-called towers. Daggerfall had the Medium or Brass Walk, Morrowind, Red Mountain, Oblivion, White Gold Tower, and Skyrim, Throat of the World. In fact, we can find a list of these towers in the Book of the Dragonborn in Skyrim, within the Prophecy of the Last Dragonborn. Now, the existence of towers is confirmed, but the conspiracy theory takes it a step further, claiming that Talmor seeks to destroy these towers in order to erase or remake reality itself. You see, according to the lore, these towers serve the metaphysical purpose of essentially preserving reality. Obviously, a very complex subject that I won't even pretend to understand entirely. And just for the record, I felt like bringing up the so-called tower theory because Elder Scrolls 6 might be the last game in the series. At least it's the last one for Todd Howard, as he announced retirement back in 2023, I believe. And even if it's not, potential Elder Scrolls 7 is so far in the future that it's basically irrelevant at this point. Thus, in a sense, Elder Scrolls 6 can be viewed as a grand finale, or a conclusion of, well, something, implying that the series needs a conclusion in the first place. Again, going back to the Prophecy of the Last Dragonborn, it does provide a list of these towers that needed to be activated prior to the coming of Alduin, the World Eater, so Red Mountain had to erupt, Oblivion Crisis had to occur, and so on. The obvious question is, why? Is there a bigger picture, or are those just some random events? One of the underlying threads is also the slow but steady degradation of Tamriel and the Empire of Man. Magic itself is becoming more obscure and detached from everyday reality, and life in general doesn't seem to improve. Another, let's call it a prophecy, is the ultimate death of the Empire. In Morrowind, as we approach our last encounter with Dagot Ur, we have the opportunity of speaking with the avatar of Tiber Septim himself, who will admit that the Empire is weak and old. In fact, here's the full quote. "The Emperor is getting old. Don't know how much longer he'll hang on. So is the whole Empire, for that matter. Getting old, that is. The Emperor and the legions have held the Empire together for hundreds of years. It's been a good thing, by and large, but maybe it's time for a change. Time for something young and new. What? No idea, because I'm old. Old dog doesn't get new ideas, but maybe young folks like you should try some new ideas. I don't know, could be messy, but change is never pretty."
What the rebels like to forget is that the Empire's what's keeping the Dominion out of Skyrim.
It's a really chilling line. Tiber Septim may be speaking specifically about the impending Oblivion crisis and the fall of the Septim dynasty and the Empire, but he may also be discussing the wider picture. I mean, he is a divine after all. The way I see it, the Cyrodiilic Empire is in a steady decline ever since the end of Morrowind. By the time of Skyrim, it's nothing but a faded image of a once mightiest force on Tamriel. And it's being replaced by another empire, the Aldmeri Dominion. To me, this is the overarching storyline. Instead of erasing reality, Talmor, in my opinion, aims to enslave humanity and usher Tamriel into a new Meretic era. And Elder Scrolls 6 could in some way finalize this epic conflict. I mean, it was hyped in Skyrim for a reason. I also believe that Elder Scrolls 6 won't jump ahead another 200 years into the future, but make a much smaller steps forward. The second Great War between the Empire and Aldmeri Dominion is almost certain, but I don't believe it'll be a main plot of the game. If I had to guess, setting the stage immediately after the second Great War makes most sense. And to be quite honest, I don't really care much about the main plot. The reason I play these games after all these years isn't because I want to replay their main questline over and over, but to experience the adventure within the masterfully crafted open world. The freedom, rich lore, and level of interactivity they provide is the main attribute. This is why today I haven't really discussed the politics of Hammerfell. It's just something that I don't care enough about to speculate. We know that Hammerfell has an active resistance against the Talmor, and it's my hope that they will ally with the Empire in the upcoming Second Great War. To summarize, Hammerfell has all the ingredients to become the best Elder Scrolls game. Players could explore a wide range of biomes in this incredibly diverse province, including snow-covered mountains, evergreen and temperate forests, vast sand deserts, tropical jungles, swamps, and grasslands, and encounter a variety of creatures, both classic and new, such as centaurs, minotaurs, giant scorpions and snakes, goblins and trolls. With that said, I don't expect deep RPG mechanics. Let's be clear, Bethesda isn't making another Morrowind or even Skyrim. But to be quite honest, as long as they craft another beautiful open world for us to explore, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, Starfield is, in my opinion, much more RPG friendly than Skyrim. More dialogues, more options and choices. So I believe that the trends within industry shift all the time, and maybe it's time for the return of more complex open world RPGs, like in the good old days. Well, I hope you enjoyed my little expectation video about the upcoming Elder Scrolls 6. By the way, this will be my only video on this subject, as I don't think we'll see the game for at least another 2 years. In the meantime, it's time for some Morrowind. Oh, and thank you for watching.
That it? That your best? Hainab stole my pants.